Very brief introduction. So, as I said, my name is Richard. I look after medical affairs and clinical development at ADM. I lead a team of clinicians and scientists, and we run an extensive research program looking at all of the bioactives in ADM's portfolio. And currently we have around 35 active randomized placebo-controlled studies that we're running in 15 different countries. And I'll be talking about one of those shortly. Very briefly, the talk today is really a talk of two parts. First up, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we do things at ADM, specifically related to postbiotics. And then the second half, I'm going to dive into the science of one of our very recently published clinical trials. So, first up, who are we? ADM is not necessarily a company that everyone has heard of. So ADM has a long pedigree, over 120 years in the food and agriculture industry. But then in recent years, ADM has become a major player in human and animal nutrition. The health and wellness team focuses very much on the microbiome, seeing the microbiome as the root of wellness. And postbiotics form an extremely important part of our research program. Before I go any further, just a very brief note on terminology and definitions. So people can get super excited about definitions, and I don't intend to delve into that today. But whenever I'm talking about postbiotics today, I'm referring to whole cell heat inactivated microorganisms. And that covers everything that I will discuss today, and indeed also the whole research program that we're running at ADM. And that leads me quite nicely onto how we do things at ADM. So first up, we have a number of R&D sites. We have a preclinical facility here in Spain, in Valencia, that looks after our human clinical research program. A preclinical site in Switzerland that is in charge of our pet and animal program, and then a phage-specific research center in Cork in Ireland. My team and I are based in London in the UK, and we look after clinical stage research for all of the bioactives in the health and wellness portfolio. But very briefly, how we do things at ADM. We have an extensive strain bank to draw from. So we start by identifying a consumer need and a physiology. We will then run an in silico screening program through our extensive strain bank that has been generated through a combination of means, acquisitions, organic growth, and also partnerships with large international strain banks. Once we have identified our first in silico selection, we then have an extensive bank of in vitro tests that will be run in one of our preclinical facilities, and we have a large number of scientists with a wealth of experience in running these models. We also have a whole host of ex vivo assays, some of which are unique to us and that we have developed in-house. And we also have extensive experience working with the nematode model Cenorbitis elegans. I'm sure many people here are familiar with C. elegans, but for those who aren't, it is a nematode that is an extremely versatile organism when looking at mammalian physiology. We're able to test rapidly, efficiently, cheaply, how our postbiotics will work in vivo using this particular model. And once we've gone through this entire process, we then have our candidate or candidates to take forward to clinical trials that we put through rigorous, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled testing, one of which I'll talk about shortly. So, in the portfolio, ADM has prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics. The focus of today's talk is very much on postbiotics, but just to say, With prebiotics, we have one of the most researched prebiotic fibers in the market, Fibersol. Probiotics, I mean, we have a host of probiotics, but our most important brands are on the screen at the moment. S-Florin-1, this is a Bifidobacterium longum. BPL1, this is a Bifidobacterium lactis. And DE111, this is a spore former, a Bacillus subtilis. In terms of postbiotics, we actually have the heat-treated whole cell version of some of our probiotics. So S-Florin-1, postbiotic, is the exact same strain as our probiotic. BPL1 postbiotic is the same strain as our probiotic. We have Lactobacillus gasseri CP2305, and we also have a whole host of pet postbiotics, which have gone through that same rigorous development pathway I described previously. But what are these postbiotics for? I mentioned at the beginning that we start with a consumer need. We look to develop science that has a market. Our Lactobacillus gasseri is aligned with trends on the gut-brain axis and sleep. BPL1 postbiotic is researched in the area of metabolic health and healthy weight management. And our postbiotic S-Florin-1 has been used in a gold standard randomized double-blind placebo-controlled study to demonstrate its effect in digestive health using irritable bowel syndrome as the model. But now I'm going to move on to talk about some new data. And when I say new data, this is really hot off the press. This paper was actually published last week, and this is the first time I get to present these data on stage. So, allergic rhinitis is the subject matter today. Something that you may not be aware of is the prevalence of allergic rhinitis. Extraordinarily, I think, up to 19% of the world's population is affected by allergic rhinitis. And when you translate that into the actual number of people, it's truly extraordinary. We're talking about 1.5 billion people globally. Of course, the prevalence varies from country to country. We see that the highest prevalence rates are found in Australia, Japan, and Brazil. And of course, depending upon the methodology, we see that there are some quite wide confidence intervals in the overall prevalence estimates. But by any measure, this is a hugely important condition when we think about the number of people that are affected globally. But what is allergic rhinitis? Essentially, it is an inappropriate activation of the immune system to an environmental stimulus. We are surrounded by environmental stimuli all day, but for many people, pollen, pet dander, or even dust mites can trigger this inappropriate immune cascade that leads ultimately to mast cell degranulation and histamine release that then produces the classic triad of symptoms. I'm sure many people in this audience experience allergic rhinitis. That is an itchy nose, a congested nose, and also watery eyes. So, today I'm going to be talking about our randomized placebo-controlled study using our postbiotic Bifidobacterium longum CECT 7347. This is our postbiotic S-Florin-1. A little bit about the study. So, we ran a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study that enrolled adults with a formal diagnosis of allergic rhinitis. Now, allergic rhinitis is categorized based on the severity of the symptomatology. And for this study, we enrolled adults with the more severe presentation, moderate to severe allergic rhinitis. everyone in the study was IgE positive. And while they were taking as required medication for their allergic rhinitis, they were otherwise healthy and taking no other regular medication. This was actually a 3-arm RCT, and individuals were randomized to receive either a placebo control, postbiotic S-florin-1, or the live probiotic of the same strain. Our primary endpoint in this study was change in combined symptom and medication score. This is abbreviated to the CSMS. The CSMS is a widely used, validated tool to assess overall allergy burden in allergic rhinitis. Our secondary outcomes included analysis of the individual components of the CSMS. We also looked at quality of life, again using a validated tool for this purpose. The RQLQ is the Rhinoconjunctivitis Quality of Life Questionnaire. And we collected blood samples and stool samples to assess cytokine panels and also shotgun metagenomic analysis. I've already said a little bit about how we classify allergic rhinitis. It's on the frequency of the symptoms, are they intermittent or persistent, and on the severity of the symptoms. So if I come over to this side, we were enrolling individuals with persistent and moderate to severe symptoms. Now, the conventional management of allergic rhinitis includes the use of antihistamines. This is entry level, intranasal corticosteroids, and then for some individuals, even systemic steroids can be used. And this is important for one of our outcome measures. If we take a moment to look at the overall research landscape, we see that there are actually quite a few publications for probiotics in allergic rhinitis, but vanishingly few for postbiotics. Now, this picture here is actually very similar to what you would expect to see with most physiologies. If we look at the overall research landscape, we see that there are a lot more publications for probiotics than there are for postbiotics. And it's no different with allergic rhinitis. So, before I move on to the results, just one quick word on our primary endpoint, just to explain it a bit more. So the combined symptom and medication score is exactly what it says it is. It takes symptom severity and breadth of symptoms and combines it with the strength of medication that is used, and it quantifies this. If we think about the first part, which is the symptom score, this looks for the presence of both nasal symptoms and ocular symptoms, and then grades the severity of those symptoms and gives you an overall numerical score. For medication, we apply that stepwise methodology. So oral antihistamines are the entry level, intranasal corticosteroids middle, and systemic corticosteroids the highest level. And again, this is quantified to give you a score out of 3. So this is the most important slide I'm going to show you, so I'm going to just spend a moment orientating you to it. This is our primary endpoint, which is change in combined symptom and medication score. If we look at the large figure on the left of the screen, this is depicting change from baseline at 2 time points. Week 8 is the end of our intervention period. Week 12 represents a 4-week follow-up period where participants received no intervention. The placebo control is in blue, the probiotic is in green, and the postbiotic is in orange. What we see is that we have a statistically significant improvement in total CSMS score in the postbiotic group compared to placebo control at week 8. Now, interestingly, when we look at the data at week 12, we see that we have lost statistical significance there. One can infer from this that you have to take the postbiotic to have the effect. Now, you may ask, what is the overall relevance of a change in CSMS of this magnitude? Well, the World Allergy Organization has very helpfully published guidance on what constitutes a clinically meaningful improvement in CSMS. And the changes that we see here at week 8 are both statistically significant and clinically meaningful, i.e., someone with allergic rhinitis would feel the difference compared to baseline. If we look at the smaller figures underneath the main figure, these represent subgroup analyses. And we conducted subgroup analyses on a number of subgroups, including those taking multiple medications and those who were polysensitive or who had multiple allergens that precipitated their allergic rhinitis. And if we look at these two subgroup analyses, we see the same pattern. We see statistically significant or highly statistically significant improvements for the postbiotic group compared to the placebo control. And I'll take just one moment here to talk about the probiotic, because I think it's interesting that what we see is that the probiotic occupies a mid-ground between our placebo and our postbiotic, actually on every outcome measure that I'm going to show you. So this is one of our secondary outcome measures on the screen at the moment. And this is the symptom scores within the combined symptom and medication score. So we can think of the primary outcome as representing overall allergy burden, whereas the DSS really focuses on symptom score. And what we see here is that similar pattern. We see a statistically significant improvement for our postbiotic group compared to placebo control at week 8. And then statistical significance is lost at week 12. Again, implying that you need to keep taking the postbiotic to have the effect. We conducted subgroup analysis, again, on subgroups based upon use of concomitant medication, use of intranasal corticosteroids, and whether or not individuals were polysensitive. And again, we see that same pattern, statistically significant or highly statistically significant improvements for our postbiotic group compared to placebo control. The second part of the combined symptom and medication score is the daily medication score, the DMS. Now, what is interesting is when we look at the data for the DMS, we see that there is a small numerical improvement for the postbiotic group, but this is not statistically significant. Indeed, there is not really much of an effect on daily medication use using this particular outcome measure. So we can say that overall, the results on combined symptom and medication score are really driven by improvements in allergic rhinitis symptoms rather than improvements in the use of medication. However, we also measured the use of medication using another metric. So this is the number of medication-free days individuals experienced. Again, it's the same color coding as before. Postbiotic is in orange, probiotic is in green, and the placebo is in blue. And when we look at the number of medication-free days, we see that there is an increase in the number of medication-free days in the postbiotic group compared to placebo. This doesn't reach statistical significance. It's a trend approaching statistical significance. But when we compare it to baseline, we see that individuals in the postbiotic group had on average around 2 more days of medication-free than they did when they started the trial. I should say we also conducted some subgroup analyses here, and when we look at those subgroup analyses, we do see significant results for the use of the number of medication-free days. Quality of life is also extremely important when we're running these clinical trials, and we used the RQ-LQ to capture quality of life in this study. Now here, again, we see that similar pattern. So we see that there is an improvement. The greatest improvement is in the postbiotic group, with the probiotic group occupying an approximate midpoint between postbiotic and placebo. This failed to reach statistical significance in our whole cohort analysis, but when we look at the subgroup who were using intranasal corticosteroids, so arguably, if you remember the pyramid approach, the use of intranasal corticosteroids was the middle rung on the pyramid. So we can say those individuals who had more severe symptoms experienced a greater improvement in quality of life when measured using the RQ-LQ. We collected serum samples at baseline and week 8, and we collected fecal samples at baseline, week 8, and week 12. There's a lot of data on this slide, and I won't go through it in detail, but I'll give you the overall conclusion. When we were designing this trial, we were anticipating, maybe hoping, that we would see some change in the cytokine profile to explain the clinical effect. We saw a great clinical effect, but we saw a complete null result across our entire cytokine profile, and so we're unable to infer anything mechanistic here. We also conducted shotgun metagenomic analysis on the fecal samples that we obtained, and we have here on the slide at the moment the data on alpha diversity, and again, we surprisingly saw very little in either the taxonomic data or the functional data from the microbiome. And this perplexed us, to say the least. So I don't have the data to share now, but we are currently working on an entirely new product to better understand and characterize the bacterial proteins that are present in our strain S-florin-1, and to understand how those bacterial proteins may be able to explain the clinical effect that we've seen in this trial. And I hope to have those data to be able to present in the not too distant future. So I will not read this slide to you, but on the slide at the moment is a summary of the overall results of this particular study. In conclusion, we saw, after 8 weeks of supplementation, a statistically significant and clinically meaningful improvement in overall allergy burden for adults with allergic rhinitis. We also saw a number of other interesting results in our subgroup analyses, which are on the stage at the moment. These are the data for S-florin-1 postbiotic, which is in the second panel. But as I mentioned before, we also have a host of other postbiotics in the portfolio for humans and also for companion animals. So if you are interested in any of the science that I've talked about today, if you're interested in postbiotics for mental health, for digestive health, or for pets, please do come and talk to either me or any of the ADM team, and we would be delighted to go through the science that we have for those products, or indeed talk about the data in allergic rhinitis in more detail. I need to say a big thank you to all of the ADM R&D teams who are spread at the various sites that I described earlier. This work would not be possible without their contribution. And with that, I think I will say thank you for your attention. And if you would like to discuss any of the data I have presented today or any of the products I've talked about today, please do come to the ADM booth, which is at the screen at the moment, 3C 210. Thank you very much for your attention. And I think if anyone has any questions, there's a couple of minutes.